Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad that you could join us today for this second of a three-part series on the state of Israel. Our program today was put together by our visiting faculty member from Haifa, University of Haifa Law School. And his name, like it was last time, is still Nadav Berman. And he is here to join us today. I'm going to turn it over to him very quickly today. But I just wanted to add that we have some new ways that we're going to be handling questions and answers today. Please put your questions in the Q&A, which should be at the bottom of your screen, I believe. And everyone gets one question. So you may want to wait a little bit to decide what that question is going to be. I know everyone likes to ask many, many questions, but we prefer to give everyone a turn. So that's what we're going to do this week and see how that goes. Also, the chat is only seen by me. So if you have any requests, you can do that. Also, if you're having an issue with hearing or accents, I highly recommend turning on the closed captioning at the bottom of your screen as well. That will aid you in understanding what's being said if you have hearing issues. I've been told this by many people. I think it's a great idea. So please, if you're having problems, turn on the closed captioning. And with that, I will turn it over to Nadav. And thank you all for joining us.
Hi, shalom everyone. Thank you so much, Lisa, for the introduction. It's a pleasure for me to moderate this conversation with Professor Uriya Shavit, whom I'll introduce momentarily. So we are now in the second event out of three. Previous Monday, we hosted Professor Alex Jacobson and spoke about the various aspects of war and peace in Israel and in Jewish tradition. We scarcely reached any ultimate conclusion and rather tried to improve our ability to think patiently and constructively about contemporary problems by the hope of sublimating them into challenges that are hopefully more readily solved or discussed. So today we have the honor of hosting you, Professor Uriya Shavit, who is the chair of the Department of Arabic and Islamic Studies and chair of the Religious Studies program at Tel Aviv University. Professor Shavit is an expert on Islam within Israel, the Middle East, and Europe, and a prolific author not only of academic books and many papers, but also published several poetry novels, fiction. So today's topic is Jews, Arabs, Judaism, and Islam under a Christian canopy. We'll try to make sense of what's going on in Israel now and to understand the characteristics of the present war with its 101 hostages who are still held in Gaza for already 346 days. Hence my masking tapes that Rachel, mother of Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, then asked us, I'm a member of the Hakel community in Israel, to put, and many other people also putting this on their shirt since then, hoping for a better and a good future and rescue for the other hostages who are still there. So as you learned from the title, we discuss Israeli reality and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how they are actually influenced by broader factors, in particular religious ones that belong not only to Judaism and Islam, but also to Christianity, the middle sister, so to speak, in the Abrahamic family of religious traditions. And often the not only the normative and ethical commandments and commitments are not in agreement, but also metaphysical, beliefs of these traditions. And we'll try to broaden the discussion and to think how these interwoven religious traditions function, and hopefully how can they better coexist and hopefully to cooperate. And let us begin by saying or laying out the structure of today's conversation. For roughly 50 minutes, I'll raise several questions to you, Uriya, about the role of Islam within this war in general, in Israel, the Middle East, perhaps in Europe or in the US, as much as you'd be interested in even broadening the umbrella or the scope. Then we will also, I'll also ask you about the previous government in Israel that, as we know, Knesset member Mansour Abbas, a Muslim Israeli citizen, played within it, and what happened since then, and so on. And also, of course, about Hamas and Islam, and about the overarching religious framework of the West, we might say, which is very much influenced by Christian traditions. And this framework or dominant discourse in the West often assumes that religion is a private thing, because religions are tending to put us in war with each other, as it actually was the case in many points of recent and remote history. But this framework, I would like to ask you, Uriya, is perhaps less helpful for understanding Islam and Judaism, that are allegedly religions that have or allocate much space, first of all, to law and to the public sphere, as influenced or even dominated by religious norms, and in this regard quite different from at least Protestant Christianity. And after we'll have this discussion, we'll open the floor for the Q&A. It's a webinar, so unfortunately we can't see your faces. Thank you for joining us once again for this webinar, and we'll try to imagine your faces by the questions that you'll ask. So please remain attentive and write your questions in the Q&A, as Lisa said before, and please leave space for others. So one question is a lot, because we ultimately see it in the chat and try to represent as much and as many questions as possible. So thank you all once again, and let's start. Professor Shavit, or may I call you Uriya?
Do you like?
Professor Shavit, could you please tell us about the role of Islam in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? It's a very broad question. We have here a bundle of serious and really broad questions. We'll try, again, we can't exhaust anything, but could you tell us about the roles that Islam as a religion plays within the current war? Is jihad or holy war really what's leading Hamas in Gaza? What led Sinwar to do this, to conduct this aggressive invasion in October 7th? And what are perhaps, or indeed, the other voices in Islam about this war and invasion and situation?
So, there isn't an easy answer to this, and here is why. Hamas is a religious movement, and everything it does is grounded in Islam and in its interpretations of Sharia. The way it understands the Quran, the way it understands the prophetic traditions, everything. That's the
Sharia,
premise.
Just
Sharia, to make it
right?
simple,
Islamic
Islamic
law.
religious law. Yeah, but everything he does, nothing is legitimate unless it is legitimate from the point of view of Islam. And its existential war against Israel is understood as a religious war. You call it jihad. Yeah, jihad is part of it, but it's grounded in religion. It's grounded in a certain interpretation of religion. The point that's important to make, I think, is actually twofold. First, you can read the exact same text and reach different conclusions. That is, if we go back to 1978, 1979, when Egypt signed a peace agreement with Israel, the regime legitimized that peace agreement through its through the religious scholars, the ulama, who were affiliated with it, legitimized it through religious justification, in part through religious justifications. And yet the Muslim Brothers, and Hamas, as we all know, is a Muslim Brothers movement originally, the Muslim Brothers opposed that agreement based on religious justifications. Now, they all read the same Quran. It's not like you have two Qurans. It's not Protestants and Catholics. In the sense, they don't have like two totally different interpretations of what it means to be a Muslim. And yet, they reach such radically different conclusions. That's the first point. The second is that if you read the charter of Hamas, and I can only do here what I do in every lecture that I've given since October 7th, and in fact, which I've done many years before October 7th, which is to urge everyone to read the charter of Hamas. Like, don't listen to the experts. That expert says this, the other expert says that. Read it for yourself and reach your own conclusions after you have read it. So if you read the charter of Hamas, their explanation for not accepting the existence of the state of Israel in any framework, like in any kind of borders, denying the right of Israel to exist, even if it were only Tel Aviv. Their explanation, their justification is that this is Waqf land, meaning this is a Muslim endowment, and it is so because Muslims were once the rulers here, in what Jews call the land of Israel, and Arabs call Palestine. That is the argument. But if you think about this argument profoundly, you'd have to agree that it is applicable also to Spain, to Serbia, to Cyprus. These were all once Muslim lands. And yet you don't hear the exact same call by Hamas or by other Muslim organizations when it comes to Spain, when it comes to Sicily, when it comes to Cyprus, when it comes to Serbia, when it comes to Romania. So obviously, it is a possible conclusion to draw from Muslim scripture, that this is a war that has to be fought and no peace agreement is or can be justified. But the fact is that you can read the exact same text and apply them or not apply them. So the war is religious, but we shouldn't think about religion in essentialist terms when it comes to trying to figure out whether it has to be a war forever, or as long as there are Muslims in the region and in our world.
Fascinating indeed. Maybe you can elaborate about this point in the context of Hamas very specifically, I mean, you gave an amazing global or broad picture of this hermeneutic flexibility that I think exists also in Judaism,
Yeah.
about which we don't speak too much today.
Here's the difference. Here's the difference between Hamas and other actors. You know, from day one of Zionism, the vast majority of Arab political actors were against the idea of a Jewish state established in the land of Israel. From day one. And then from a certain point in the 80s, actually from a certain point in the late 70s, there emerged two trends within the Arab world. One identified or associated, affiliated more with the nationalists, the national Palestinian movement. They were somewhat ambiguous as to whether or not they are willing to accept the existence of Israel based on territorial compromise, but whether or not they are willing or not. Yasser Arafat, there is this long-standing debate among historians and analysts in Israel and politicians. Was Arafat sincere when in the 80s he embarked on something that it was possible to understand as a peace initiative? Or was it deception on his part? There is this debate, and by the way, I'm not sure there is a conclusive answer, because contrary to what we tend to think, politicians don't always know the way they are charted. You know, I mean, it's not always that there is this master plan and then everything is either deception or actually following the plan as is, pursuing the plan as is. So it's very tricky. My intuitive answer to the question was Arafat in the 80s and the 90s, was he sincere or was it deception? That he himself did not know. The ambiguity was part of it. He did not know what he wants to end up with. He was open to both options, that there would be a final status agreement or that he would continue his life as a terrorist. Both options were there. But the ambiguity was there, like that it wasn't clear what the PLO wants. With Hamas, there was never any doubt. There was never any nuance. Never. From day one of its existence, it made very clear that it does not accept the existence of the state of Israel. From day one of its existence, it made very clear that any other Arab Muslim actor, even one democratically elected, who would sign a peace treaty with Israel, that peace treaty would not be considered by Hamas as legitimate. So in a way, it should have been easier for Israel to handle Hamas because there was no nuance. They were very clear about their goals. They were very clear that the goals are for the state of Israel to be eliminated. They were very clear that this is a zero-sum game, that either they would prevail or the Jewish state would prevail.
Yeah, thank you. To make your life harder, are there any significant minority opinions now in Gaza being vocal or just expressed about there being different approaches in Islam toward the Jews in general, or
in Gaza itself, you mean? Not that I know of, but you know, because this is not exactly a democratic society in Gaza.
Sure.
We don't really know what people think, and all those opinion polls, I don't know how much value there is in them. Just like opinion polls in Russia, I don't know what that means. But we should acknowledge something, even though it's not that easy to acknowledge it. There were one and only one free and somewhat fair elections in the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas won that election by a wider margin than what Hitler had in Germany in 1933.
Wow.
The war, actually, we should be also honest about one more thing. I mean, Egypt had only one time free and fair elections. They were pretty fair and pretty free. And the Muslim Brothers won, and by an overwhelming majority. And it's not that the Peace Now movement in Egypt won a small share of the votes. There was no such movement. There was no actor, almost none whatsoever, in Egyptian politics who made it his main agenda and main objective to advance the peace relations with Israel or advance peace in the Middle East. In fact, the Egyptian liberals, the more popular Egyptian liberals, were more anti-Israeli than the regime. So we simply have to acknowledge those facts and not, they don't necessarily need to draw us to definite conclusions, but we have to acknowledge the facts for what they are.
Yes, I mean, back then I heard a few, denouncements from Islamic authorities of the massacre. So, but you say within Hamas and the Muslim Brothers movement, no real opposition prevails, or
not one that we can observe. It doesn't mean that there isn't.
Yes. Yes.
The fact of the matter is that we don't see one emerging. That's the truth.
Yes. So maybe it will lead us to the second second stage of our discussion, which is more interior in Israel. And I mentioned earlier, Knesset member Mansour Abbas, professionally, he was a dentist, head of the Ra'am party, Reshima Aravit Meuchedet, or in English, United Arab Party. And the previous government in Israel, led by, in rotation, by Prime Ministers Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, was known as Memshelet HaShinui, or perhaps Ichui, change government, or the rehabilitation government, trying to put together the Israeli society, and it was really a unique, I would say, historical event of an Arab Muslim party joining the coalition, and again, the fact that
actually, Nadav, it was more dramatic than this, because when you
please. I would like to hear about the role that Islam played in this regard, because I heard. Yes,
here's the challenge.
Yes,
here's the challenge, that my forthcoming book is about this political party and what made it possible for Islamists, from people who intellectually draw from the Muslim Brothers, what made it possible for them to be the enablers of a government led by an Orthodox Jew, former head of the settlers movement. And moreover, their initial preference, one they were not shy to openly declare, was to actually join a coalition of the Israeli right. I'm trying to sort of find a comparison, a compelling one for an American audience, but this would be the equivalent of I know everything has gotten so crazy that any comparison might not work. But this would be like if there are like environmentalists, that they would prefer Trump to Harris, sort of, but consciously, like not as a last resort, but they would say we prefer him to her. That would more or less be the equivalent. So what made it possible? In the end, it's now here's the trick. The last book you write is always the one that if you get the opportunity to start talking about, you're like, no one will see daylight. So I'm hesitant here, but I'll just say in two sentences, two things. First, what made it possible for them to join the coalition was the great flexibility inherent to Sharia, inherent in Sharia. That is, Sharia provides mechanisms which allow you to reach almost any result as a jurist, as a mufti, if you think they're in the interest of the Muslim nation, a Muslim public, or a Muslim individual. I won't get into detail as to what makes that possible, but it's a very cyclical process, because you basically say, in order for Islam to triumph, or to the very least, in order for Islam to endure, we need to suspend a prohibition for a given time.
You speak from the throat of the
as
Muslim
Muslims.
Yes.
A prohibition remains a prohibition. Like, pork is still pork, wine is still wine. But the argument is that in given circumstances, in order to advance higher purposes, higher objectives of the lawgiver, it is legitimate to suspend prohibitions for those objectives to be advanced, to be protected. Now you understand why this is cyclical, because I'm basically saying, in order to advance Islam, I am somewhat giving up on Islam temporarily. What makes it even more complicated for the outsider, but also for the insider, is that the religio-juristic philosophy of the Islamic movement in Israel is based both on the concept that pragmatism, moderation, facilitation are an essence of Islam, as well as on the concept that Islam must triumph, and for Islam to triumph, sometimes you have to suspend prohibitions, God-given prohibitions, for Islam to endure, for Islam to ascend. So you never quite know whether it's A or B that are at play. Whether it is that we are now pragmatic because the essence of Islam as we understand it is pragmatism and moderation, or that we are now pragmatic because the circumstances do not allow us to be dogmatic if we want to advance Islam. What this made possible for the Islamists in Israel, and for my book, I interviewed all the living leaders of the political arm and the broader religious movement. They remain staunch anti-Zionists, but they can be so vehemently anti-Zionist and support a right-wing government at the same time because of that very complicated and nuanced texture of Islamic law. Which is why the question I'm often asked is one that cannot be answered. The question I'm often asked is, are they dogmatic or are they pragmatic? Is it deception or are they sincere? And the answer is, their religious philosophy allows them to be both at the same time without exactly calling whether they are the one or the other.
Fascinating. It's once again would be fascinating to ask to which extent this observation about pragmatism, dogmatism, and the interplay between tough-mindedness and tender-mindedness applies to Judaism as well.
But I'll tell you something, Nadav, before Judaism, I want to say something about Christianity, which you mentioned. The idea that religion plays no role in Western politics is nothing but the result of the fact that most political scientists are very secular people, and therefore they have blind spots. The blindest of those spots is how crucial religion is in determining electoral results. I would encourage all of you to do something which I'm not sure many people have done. When you read the breakdowns of opinion polls in the United States from the 2020 election, there is the women, men, young, old, periphery, cities, ethnicities. There are very few opinion polls about religious devotion and who you voted for. But when you read those polls, you find something that's fascinating. It's not just the difference between church-going Americans and those who are not when it comes to who they voted for. There is a huge gap between mainline Christians and evangelist Christians in terms of who they voted for. And there is a huge difference between people who go to church once a week and people who go to church once a month in terms of who they voted for. So I'm saying religion is very present everywhere, not just in the Muslim world, and certainly it is very present in Israel.
Yes, I wanted to ask you more about Mansour Abbas, but you gave us the basic argument about his pragmatism. I would ask, for time limitations, I'll save it for our later for a conversation. But is it about Islam, or to which extent Mansour Abbas is really caring humanitarianly about the lives of women and men being murdered in the Arab population in Israel, arguably due to a lack of policing, but also due to a lack of involvement in the political.
But you see that,
yes,
that's again a very secular point of view, because from the point of view of Mahmoud Abbas,
the humanitarian is religious.
The distinction you drew just doesn't exist. He cares about human lives because he's a Muslim.
Sure.
And being a Muslim means caring about human lives. By the way, I have to say, there is something interesting about Islamism, which is that many of the leaders, in fact, most of the leaders are not religious scholars. They're not people who attended universities and did an undergrad and then graduate degree in Islam. Most of them are professionals. Mansour Abbas is a dentist, a PhD. But I have to say, his knowledge of Islam is profound. His knowledge of Islam is profound, but he's not academically structured. He knows a lot. He's very much immersed in Islam, in Islamic thought, Islamic law. But he's not a scholar. He's not an alim.
Sure. What I wanted to ask, of course, the human rights discourse is predominantly Western in the sense of very different from that of Abbas. What I wanted to ask is about what your colleague, Professor Hillel Cohen, calls the long duration and the short time, right? The long time being, messianic, ultimate messianic hopes, and the short time being just daily mundane concerns that once in the days of the Catholic Church were called seculum, right? The term secularity, as I learned then from Jose Casanova, his book about public religions, the term secular, right, was used in Catholic Christianity to denote these people, clergy, who work for the society, right? Social workers, as we would call them today. So my question was not if Abbas is thinking as, a Red Cross humanitarian person who might often be secular, but whether Abbas was motivated not by some long distance messianic, Muslim ideals or jihad, but about a more worldly concern that are, as you say, very rooted in Islam, as are rooted in any religion that has the ideal of charity. That was my question.
Well, I wouldn't use the word messianic anyway. I would use the word maybe triumphal, because these are people who believe that Islam is the truth. And the truth is bound to prevail at some point. But there is no conflict here. If you want Islam to prevail at some point, you must acknowledge, according to Abbas, its true essence. Its true essence is that it is the religion of pragmatism and facilitation. And if it is understood by its true essence, it will prevail. So it's not giving up one for the other. This is certainly not the case. It doesn't, the important point is, Abbas does not consider himself a lesser Muslim, a less devout Muslim. He sees himself as someone manifesting, representing Islam that it's true to itself. This is not a case of Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox and modern Orthodox and Reform Judaism. No, this is, I am the authentic thing. That's the trick of modern Islam. I don't like to use the word liberal because it's not liberal, but that's the trick of pragmatic Islam. More modernity, more inclined to integrate modernity Islam. The trick is to say, we are the authentic thing. We are the Islam of Prophet Muhammad. They are the distorters. Those who are not pragmatic, those who are not modern. Because our roots point to the essentiality of modernity in our lives today. I know it sounds absurd and maybe very complicated, but this is the mindset. And there is so much literature which basically says, literature also in the sense of sermons, in the sense of khutbahs, that makes exactly this point. We are not lesser Muslims because we are pragmatic. We represent Islam that it's true to its true self.
And, I once had a conversation this year after October 7th with a friend who said the following thing, and I'm interested to hear what you think, that Mansour Abbas is really part of the Muslim Brothers movement, and therefore, so said my friend or academic colleague, therefore is not really different from Hamas. And actually, the fact that he entered the coalition was for several, or many Muslim people in neighboring states, actually a threat, because Muslim Brothers movement, as you said. So I'm curious, I'm passionate to learn more about whether it's really true, because my sense was that Abbas is really more of a pragmatist, and he cares about preserving life and advancing the well-being.
You are returning to the notion that it has to be one of the two, where the entire point of the mindset of the trend of Islamism that Abbas represents is that you can be both at the same time. You can be the dogmatic, triumphal Muslim and the pragmatic, facilitating, realistic, realpolitics Muslim. But there is one more point that we shouldn't overlook. From the very early days of the existence of the State of Israel, the Arab public, I think today people, especially in the States, they tend to use the term Palestinian Israelis, but that's also a bit complicated because many of them do not identify as Palestinians, or not necessarily identify primarily as Palestinians. But put that aside for a second. From the very early days of Israel, the Arab public was divided into at least two camps. One that was very pragmatic and wanted as much integration into the Zionist state as possible, and using political power, the fact that they can vote to gain certain rewards, just like any other political party represented in the public does. And the more nationalist, anti-Zionist camp, with different variations, but nevertheless one that rejected such cooperation and integration. When you look at opinion polls in the Arab public, talking over the past 20 years, support for joining a Zionist coalition, and by the way, any kind of Zionist coalition, has always been somewhere between 45 to 65%. Abbas was attentive to his public. The majority of Arab Israelis want their political representatives to be in coalition. Even if they are anti-Zionist, they want them to be in coalition. And that's the main reason why it succeeded. It's not about Islamism. I mean, I have to be honest. I don't think too many people read those religious texts that I've read. I say I don't think. I know they haven't, because I know where they were published, and I know how many people actually read those, that newspaper and those books and so forth. That is measurable. So I think the main reason for Abbas's success was that he was attentive to what the public wants. And he grounded giving the public what the public wants in religious terminologies, which, from my studies, some people are just satisfied with knowing that there is out there somewhere a mufti who says it's okay. They don't need to read the actual argumentations. It's like when you go to a medical doctor, you're satisfied that they know what they're doing.
Yes. So would it be correct to say that, that certain or that the secularist Arab, Muslim, Christian Knesset members who preferred to be, for example, more Marxist, or who are just more Marxian, are tending to be less representing the Arab minority and minorities?
No, they represent. They
words?
represent a portion and opinions that also exist. The irony is that Islamists had more tools to create an intellectual premise that legitimizes being part of a Zionist coalition than the nationalists, than the Marxists, and other actors. That is remarkable. And I think one of the reasons is that they were basically playing on two fields. The field of nationalism, like everyone else, but then also the field of Islamic law, which allows for those facilitations and tricks, if you will, that enable you to do things which otherwise, in normal circumstances, you're not allowed to do.
Yes, legal fictions, as we call them in the philosophy of Jewish law. So time is running out, and I would like to hear in the coming 10 minutes from you, Uriya, more about this complexity of what I mentioned earlier, right? The so-called sacred canopy, right? That's a part of it's drawn from a book by Peter Berger, the great sociologist, who criticized the invisible bias that many scholars in the West or in the academy are having about the rise of secularism, because according to Berger, many scholars in the academy, and people in general, right, are working within a scheme of secularism, which historically is a product of the Reformation, right, by Martin Luther in the 16th century. And Luther perhaps couldn't imagine, but secularism is a result not only of the science and disenchantment and some intellectual processes, but from the idea that God is actually the Protestant God, who is remote, more transcendent, arguably, than the Catholic God. And what was the contention that Berger made is that he called it methodological atheism, which is the assumption that we can and we may and we should examine human societies and culture while totally bracketing the religious commitments, religious differences, perhaps also religious similarities that might be shared by many or most human religions and perhaps even persons. So my question is, do you see this dominance also in Israel of just ignoring Judaism, Islam, and Christianity as well? Christianity might well be a victim, so to speak, of this.
Them where?
Sorry?
Ignoring them.
Yeah, so I'm asking whether you can see it, or in which ways in Israel, seeing again, ignoring the religious factors that influence
absolutely.
the public, and
here's the thing.
Yes.
I mean, those who know the political discourse in Israel, I think will recognize that much of it is based on the assumption that Israelis vote based on their ethnicity. I'm now talking about Israeli Jews. That is, that if you are an Ashkenazi Israeli, that is, if your roots are in Europe or the West in general, then you'd vote one way. And if you are a Mizrahi, right, that is, if your roots are from Muslim countries, then you'll vote another way. Actually, another book I'm going to publish very soon shows that this is simply not the case. The best predictor for how Israelis vote is what their relation to Judaism is. And the more religious you are, the more likely it is that you'd affiliate yourself with the Israeli right. Now, I tell you something many people will find shocking. The ultra-Orthodox in Israel situate themselves in spectrum surveys more to the right than the religious Orthodox, than the National Orthodox, known as religious Zionists or National Orthodox. They are the most right-wing group. And the Israeli left and center left is comprised almost exclusively of secular Israelis. That cannot be a coincidence, obviously. Now, I suspect we don't have time to dwell on the explanations for why this is so and why it developed so. But your point is very correct. Religion matters a great deal. And it's very possible that some sociologists, political scientists, they don't recognize how much it matters simply because they are not religious. They cannot comprehend the importance of religion for religious people.
Since they work under the canopy of what Berger called methodological atheism, which, by the way, many religious scholars also, adopt, but utilize because it's very conventional or very sometimes fashionable. And we should also say at the same breath that this sacred canopy, namely that of secularism, which is the child or the grandson of the Reformation, is also what arguably, gave birth to modern democracy and to the idea of civil equality and human rights. But some of the voices who are critical against a kind of strict secularism would say we have to be aware of the religious traditions hovering above and really functioning within the societies. And often it's important not only to remember the pragmatism or to be open for interreligious dialogue, but also to to recall that sometimes religious ideas and religious virtues and vices are migrating to secular societies. And when one is not aware of forceful religious ideas, it might lead to dogmatism or to violence.
True, but in the end, in the end, we tend to, I think perhaps because we've had some good times. Liberal societies had some good, comfortable times for a long time. And people living in them start to take them for granted, which they're not. In the end, in the history of humankind, there are two basic, at least in the modern history of humankind, there are two basic kinds of regimes. There are doubt-based regimes and there are revelation-based regimes. And doubt-based regimes are regimes that allow for a competition as to what truth is regarding everything. And revelation-based regimes, which can be theocracies, but also, for example, Marxist regimes, are based on the notion that there is one overriding truth and that everything must align with that one overarching truth, and those who take it upon themselves to serve as its interpreters. Now, the biggest problem of the Muslim world is that it is still very much a world governed by revelation-based regimes. Even when these are not religious regimes, these are revelation-based regimes. And one of the greatest ironies of Western Muslim relations, I write about that in my book, Scientific and Political Freedom in Islam, that was published, I think, 7 years ago, is that precisely because Islam was more flexible than Christianity in integrating modern concepts and giving them a religious face. Muslim scholars, religious Muslim scholars, ulama, were able to convince the publics that you don't have to make the choice. You can be both revelation-based and doubt-based at the same time. That is what, by the way, the main idea of modern Islamic scholarship, that unlike the case of Christianity, Islam as a religion has the ability to provide all the benefits of a revelation-based regime without giving up on any of the rewards of a doubt-based society, especially in terms of scientific progression and democratic progression. Now, if that was true, it would have been amazing, because there isn't a better regime to live in than one which is both doubt-based and revelation-based. It's really like the ultimate regime, the ultimate social structure, social order. The only problem is it's not possible. You have to be one of the two. And the United States, as much as religion is important, and Israel today, as much as religion is important, is a doubt-based regime. Muslim societies are, most of them are not. I think the root of a lot of the problems the Muslim world is facing is that they are not, and that they believe that they are. You know, if they had recognized that you have to make the choice, and there was this conflict that you had in the Christian world, then someone would ultimately triumph. But the problem is they really think this mix is possible, and it's not.
Wow, that was a conclusive assertion. You know, some would say that Judaism is also perhaps like Islam, and Christianity in its
It cannot be, Nadav.
versions.
It's not about Judaism. It's not about Judaism, Islam, Christianity, communism. It's about whether or not you have the idea that there is one book, whether it's the capital or the Bible, which contains the ultimate truth. Once you have that, and once it becomes the premise for the social order, it's a revelation-based society, and that society would never progress like doubt-based societies.
So that's a modernist thesis for sure. But
Not at all.
I would ask you, Uriya, specifically about Ibn Hazm, a medieval scholar, Muslim scholar, who said that Abraham being criticized by the Torah, by the Hebrew Bible, is an indication for the falsity of the Torah, of the Bible being a fake. So I wonder again if Judaism has a different theology in which
you're
human beings are arguing with God.
You're mixing concepts and terminologies. No, it has nothing to do. That's an argument I hear a lot. Look, there is pluralism in Judaism. Read the Talmud. There is diversity of opinions. Same in Islam. You can argue the same for Christianity. That is not the question at all. Also, the question I'm interested in is not whether a certain religious scholar is liberal, so-called liberal, feminist, whatever, or a reactionist. That's not the question. The question is the social order based on the idea that one ultimate truth has already been attained? When that is the case, it will always end up a dictatorship. By the way, that applies to certain, academic trends you see in the United States today that are very much anti-religious, but in the end, the outcome is the same. An oppressive regime where people are afraid to talk. So
in general, I believe most people here, including me, prefer pluralism, right? And democracy and pluralism. Democracy is based, if I understand you correctly, and democratic flourishing on a kind of pluralism, right? Not rather than one voice that dictates and overrides all the others. And this, I think, is a good point to turn to the Q&A, if I may, and I mean that's, I think, an important lesson about each and every religion, that pluralism and plurality of voices and the constructive dispute thereby is a good idea, keeping the multitude of voices, and also within the inter-religious arena.
So again, Nadav, I don't like the word pluralism, because you have hypothetically you have pluralism in Iran. It's not a question of whether there is a plurality of opinions. It's a question of whether or not there is this concept that the ultimate truth has already been attained, and we have to lead our lives in its light. That's the main and most important question.
Sure. And I'm just, as a scholar of Judaism and pragmatism, I have my doubts about the idea that only doubt that we can make it to a productive discussion and conversation based only on doubt. I think also in democracy, there were various people saying that after postmodernism, we should recall that it's not only doubt, but also certain kind of agreements and constructive premises that lead us.
Again, Nadav, that is not the point. Doubting. You can firmly believe that your truth is the ultimate truth. That is not my concern. My concern, in terms of the difference.
My wife is old. I'm never.
This is an important point. This is a crucial point. The question is not whether you have in society people who believe that they're all the ultimate truth. You can have those people, and if they believe in that, that's totally fine. The question is whether they want to base the social order on that premise, that their ultimate truth is everyone's ultimate truth. Whether it's Marxism or the Quran or political correctness, whichever it is. Yes. That's where tyranny begins.
Yes. So thank you so much, Professor Shavit. Let us turn to the Q&A. We have here several questions. I'll try to represent them. And please feel free to address as many as you can, and which we don't have a lot of time, but about 20 minutes, a bit more if you find it productive. So one question by Sheldon concerns foreign relations. That's an interesting question about maybe Christianity and Judaism and Islam, more broad. Another question by Ahmed asks about the Arab Peace Initiative of the beginning of the common millennia for 2002, and about, you perhaps want to elaborate about the Abraham Accords, arguably a product of a certain interreligious openness and perhaps pragmatism. Another question by Bob.
Nadav, one question at a time, please. It's too difficult for people to absorb all those issues. So one at a time.
Okay, so yeah, so please, Uriya, maybe.
Yeah, okay,
maybe
I'll go.
I
can say them myself. So I guess since there are not so many, I will go through them one by one.
That's a good
Yes, but we just have to represent because audience. So
the first question I see by Sheldon is, how does the new president of Mexico affect the Israel war? I have to confess, I have no idea. I to be honest, I didn't even know Mexico has a new president. So, but the truth is, Mexico is not a big influential actor in this conflict. Why has Israel rejected the Arab Peace Initiative since 2002, despite the offers of security, normalization, and acceptance? Well, that's an excellent question by Ahmed. There is the Arab Peace Initiative has a lot of potential, but there is a caveat, and it's very important to recognize it. There is a difference between the ultimate Arab Peace Initiative and the Saudi Peace Initiative, and the difference is, the Arab Peace Initiative is not very clear about how the question of the Palestinian refugees would be resolved. Now, obviously, from an Israeli Zionist point of view, if you give the right to 5 or 6 million Palestinian refugees and their descendants to become Israeli citizens, that's the end of the Jewish state. The Palestinians, not just Hamas, also the Palestinian national movement, has never given up on the right of return. And this is what derailed the Oslo process to begin with, to a large extent. So I think that answers the question, at least in part. Bob is asking, is Israel fighting till there is a surrender, or when Israel decides Hamas is killed? This seems to accept future. Is there a solution to prevent future conflicts? So these are two different questions. I have to say, I find the discourse about this war very awkward. I think people, in terms of where they stand politically, should have come up with very different conclusions to the war. I can only say where I stand. In the end, the only solution to this conflict is to have two states. Obviously, the way this has been tried by the most brilliant political minds. Do you know how many hours, days, weeks Bill Clinton spent on this? So these are like the most brilliant people politically on planet Earth, and they failed. Obviously, you need to think outside the box for this. You can't keep trying doing the same thing and hope to reach different results. I don't think we have time to elaborate on what that could entail, but I will tell you one thing. If the war in Gaza does not end with Hamas eliminated, not defeated, eliminated, there will not be peace here in 100 years. Because we have a Palestinian national movement that arguably accepts and recognizes the legitimacy of a two-state solution. And you have Hamas that doesn't. How can you hope to ever, in any foreseeable future, reach a two-state solution? if Hamas is allowed to win or even endure this conflict. So I would have thought people who are pro-two-state solution would be the first ones to call for the ultimate and total defeat of Hamas in this war, and it's exactly vice versa. From day one of the conflict, I thought there are only two things which are like the absolute truth, the axioms of all of this. Number one, this conflict should not be allowed to end, to conclude, with Hamas still in power in Gaza. And B, no Palestinian child should be hungry, should be left to die of hunger. And the only way, at least in the near future, to ensure those two objectives are met would be for Israel to occupy the Gaza Strip for a temporary period and to impose a military government there with the aim of facilitating a transition to an Arab force or the PLO government. That unfortunately is not the way the Israeli government is seeing things, and unfortunately it doesn't seem to be the way the American administration is seeing the situation. So I'm not very optimistic about the way this is developing. There is a question from Jerry. Is the Hamas Islamic fundamentalism embraced by the Arab citizens living in Israel? Is that a problem? If so, it's very hard to speak about the Arab citizens in Israel because there is such diversity of political views. But I would say, by and large, no. I mean, you know, if you visit an Israeli hospital, you'll see that 1/5, 1/4, 1/3 of the medical doctors are Arab. The nurses, the same. So would these people be now attending and caring for thousands of injured soldiers if that was the case? I don't think that's. I would not say that in such broad terms.
I think the next question will challenge your answer, because allegedly the Al-Aqsa issues or the Temple Mount, contributed very much to kind of unification between Arab Israelis, or made things worse. So what do you think about that? That's questioned by Bob Olish about the Temple Mount and its role within the complications.
I'll say the following about Temple Mount. Judaism was very smart to say the third temple would be established when the Messiah comes. When will the Messiah come? Maybe in a day, maybe in 500 years. These were the rabbis of yesterday. Many of the rabbis of today, most of the ultra-Orthodox rabbis are very clear about it. There was the front page headline in an ultra-Orthodox newspaper 2 weeks ago, I have it here with me, was in Arabic, saying that they're very much against any change of the status quo on Temple Mount. Now, this is playing with fire, and it's not very clever. We do have to remember something. There are today in the world approximately 16, 17 million Jews. There are almost 2 billion Muslims. So this is something that's good for us to sometimes keep in mind. David is asking, in the West, religious affiliation is diminishing, and what can be said about the Islamic world in those terms? Is attachment to Islam as a religion diminishing by the population? If so, might that not undermine the authoritarian social order? No, actually, the answer is no. Muslim societies most of them, are today more religious than they were 30, 40 years ago, which is not what you can say about Europe or the United States. And in fact, since I spent a great deal of time over the past 15 years doing field studies in European mosques, now it's always this scene on Friday noon where you see around you or somewhere in your vicinity those empty cathedrals and churches, and then you enter a mosque and it's really packed to the brim. So no, there is no decline of religious sentiments in the Muslim world. And I think the final question is, how informed is Israeli political leadership on your understanding of the basic conflict in Islam between pragmatism and triumphalism in terms of its policies, and can such understanding help to move Israel forward? Yes, generally, if people were not just politicians, generally the Israeli public was more informed, that would have been a good thing. I can only go back to what I said before about the charter of Hamas, that like in every public lecture I had since October 7th, but also before, I would ask the audience, sometimes it's like several hundred people, have you read the charter of Hamas? And these are usually educated people, because these are the kind of people who attend lectures. And I'm always surprised that the show of hands is like 1, 2, 3 people. Like 1% of the audience, 3% of the audience. Most people have not read the Charter of Hamas. I can only encourage you again to do so yourselves. But definitely, if you're an Israeli member of Knesset, you should read it. And if our prime minister had read it, maybe a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe things would have been different on October 7th. I think that was the last. I think that was the last question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there any other question, Kevin, that you see?
Yeah, thank you so much, Uriya. I'm sorry that I couldn't be with all of you in the beginning. This is due to dental treatment that is still helping me to overcome. As many people know, I was seriously injured in May in a fall, and I'm still recovering from that. So that's why I wasn't able to be here with you in the beginning, and welcome everybody to the event. Uriya, I have a question for you that is based on my current reading of Moses Mendelssohn from the 19th century. So is it possible today, what was done in the 19th century, to create a certain shared ground? It's not so much a methodological atheism as Peter Berger said originally in his book. By the way, in 2008, Peter Berger had a very different position than it was originally. But can we talk about natural religion, as Mendelssohn argued? That basically all rational people can agree to 3 things: the existence of God, divine providence, and immortality of the soul. And basically, if you're an intellectual, it doesn't matter who you are, Christian, Jew, Muslim, whatever else, you will have a shared understanding. Is that something that is at all feasible in your understanding, or not at all, because you make such a radical separation between doubt and revelation? My point is that you can be very much within the world of revelation and develop critical thinking. That's exactly what Mendelssohn did, and many other people, especially in the religious enlightenment, as we call it.
Well, you can, but the thing is, you can be very much into revelation in a doubt-based society and be a great scientist or a very radical politician, but it doesn't work the other way around. That is, it's very easy to be a revelation-based individual in a doubt-based society, but it's impossible to do a doubt-based person in a revelation-based society. But the idea of natural religion is not harmful because it doesn't have the revelation-based premise. I mean, what are you saying? Basically, there is God, that's very abstract. There is divine providence, that's very abstract. There is a soul. I mean, what do I care? That's the afterlife. The question is if you then come up with a book and you say, well, this book has something very important to say about, for example, how we came into being. And because it has that something very important to say, then I don't allow you to teach in your schools evolution theory. Then starts the problem. There's the difference.
Yeah, first of all, I have to correct myself. Yeah, I should have said 18th century, not 19th century. That's a mistake. But what you're saying, in a sense, that you pose religion and science, let's call them as capital R, capital S, as if they are fundamentally at odds with each other, in conflict with each other. but that is not necessarily the case, or doesn't have to be the case. So the Muslim doctor, who is definitely a scientist, can live very well both with science and with his religious commitments, and so forth for the Jew. So why are you putting us in this kind of dichotomy that is not necessary?
Because because I'm not. Because I'm actually not. The thing is, again, the Muslim doctor can be very much a Muslim doctor in a doubt-based society. He cannot really exhaust his or her potential as scientist in a revelation-based society. I demonstrated that in my book, in Scientific and Political Freedom in Islam, through the evolution of the teaching of evolution theory.
Okay.
And what's remarkable is that Muslim scholars, because of this flexibility inherent to Islamic interpretations and to the application of Islamic law, because there is that flexibility, which is basically to allegorize anything so that it accommodates science. There wasn't this issue that the church had with Darwin. That never really existed in Islam in the initial phases of the big debate. In fact, it was even presented as an explanation or an argument why Islam is the true religion, which Christianity is not. The notion that we were able to accommodate Darwinism and the Christians were not. But what I showed in my book is that through time, there were different interpretations as to the applicability of the extent to which evolution theory is commensurate with the Quran. And the important point is not so much whether one alim, one religious scholar said this and the other said something else. The question is, who has the ultimate say? Like, who has discretion? Who has the authority to say,
yeah,
this interpretation conflicts with the true understanding of the Quran, therefore you're not allowed to teach it. So obviously you can be a Muslim you can be a Muslim, an engineer or whatever, or a biologist who does not accept, I don't know if biologist, but for sure engineer, who does not accept evolution theory. That's not so important. The question is, do you create a social structure in which I am not allowed to pursue my interest in evolution theory because you say so? And that is where the problem starts. Obviously, Newton was a very devout Christian. So obviously you can be a great scientist and a religious individual and very devout. But that would have not been possible for Newton if he lived in Saudi Arabia, where the Grand Mufti believed that of course I'm mixing here many scientists, but no, just for the sake of the argument, that says if you tell us that there was Big Bang, or if you tell us that the Earth revolved around the sun, then you're an infidel. You're going to be excommunicated or you're going to be hanged. That is where the problem starts.
Yeah, okay. The question is, as we try to survive in that very difficult environment, can there be something in the middle, some kind? You dismissed the word pluralism, or you said it's not really where the real issue lies, but I still think that maybe it is. And could there be something in which the people in the middle, so shall we say, the moderate person who respects tradition, whether it's in Islam or in Judaism or in Christianity or in the Druze tradition and or Baha'i tradition, whatever it is, but speak from that traditionalism and try to find some kind of a shared middle that will enable people to coexist without killing each other. That's really the bottom line. Can these communities coexist without killing each other? And I think that there can be. You suggest only two-state solution is the way out. I'm not sure.
No, actually, I don't know if that's the only way out. And in any case, it has to be advanced and negotiated in a very different way, because obviously the way that it has been advanced since the early 90s did not work. When it comes to scientific freedom and democracy, again, we have to separate, we have to distinguish between individuals who can be anything and societies, which in the end can only be one of two things. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to societies as entities, they can either be revelation-based or doubt-based. It's like university campuses. What would you say if someone told you that you can have absolute freedom on your campus, on your university campus, for all professors, except for those professors who are scholars of religion or political science? But the professor of physics, biology, engineering, computers, they would have the fullest of liberty. Those who deal with religion and with political science would not. I guess the answer of most professors would be no, an absolute resounding no, because they would say a campus cannot be divided against itself. It's either 100% free or it's 0% free. The same goes for societies. You cannot have this somewhere in the middle where you say you can discuss with absolute freedom everything except the question whether Muhammad was really a prophet and a historical figure or not. If you can discuss this one question, then you can discuss any question with freedom, with full freedom at least.
That's a great, yes, great. I mean, I think for Chava and I have, some reasons to doubt a strict dichotomy or stark dichotomy between revelation and doubt. And we hope
revelation-based society and revelation-based and doubt-based society, not revelation and doubt. Revelation-based society.
Sure. I'd also, add to the cart, it's very common nowadays to speak about freedom of speech, for example, in the case of, of fake, right? Which is also in some way, you might say you should defend endless ways of speaking lies, but perhaps the idea, at least the idea of revelation and of God as identified with truth, or as espousing truth, is more important than we thought before the age of fake news and so on. But that's an entirely different discussion to open. And Chava, should we conclude now? Or?
Yes, we are going to signal to our audience that these are very complicated questions, of course, and the point to take home is that we have to be much more informed. As Professor Shavit has suggested, we have to be more informed about Islam. We have to be more informed about the nuances, both within the Islamic world, in the Christian world, the Jewish world. And my concern as an educator and an intellectual is that subtlety is getting lost. And it's getting lost because people don't read the right thing. They read whatever they read on their Facebook. I don't know where people get their news anymore, but we lost that capacity to really get into the nuances. So I invite all of you, first of all, to join us for next Monday's presentation, which will focus more on Jewish messianism and how the role, right, Nadav, how the role of the messianic passion, shall we say, especially in the West Bank, by settlers in the West Bank, actually that creates conditions that make it very difficult for coexistence. So all of us need to study more, all of us need to be more informed by the right kind of thing. And also, as I said, I agree with Uriya, keep our critical mind on. So doubt doesn't mean that, yeah, we all need to be critical of the way we read the past, critical way we interpret the present. But actually, the word interpretation, I think, is the key word. We are all engaged in interpretation. So here, yeah, whether it's revelation-based society or doubt-based society, it's all about interpretation. The big word for that in religious studies is hermeneutics. We are all engaged in hermeneutical work. We can get out of it. That's what it means to be a human in many ways. So all we can do is go study, right? So that's the only thing left for us, and that's what Jewish studies is trying to do, is to bring the complexity to the attention of all of those who join us for our program. So thank you very much, and we will continue next Monday, the same time, 10 o'clock Phoenix time or Arizona time. And we will see you all there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, just to say thank you, Chava, and to
Go
say
ahead.
that we'll host Professor Annabelle Herzog, a scholar, an important scholar of Levinas and other Jewish thinkers, and we'll actually ask whether Messianism is more important than we thought, and whether, again, remembering that religions are still present, whether democracy actually must have some kind of humanistic, worldly, messianic commitments that could be seen as secular, perhaps. So we'll keep questioning and challenging and doubting. And thank you all for joining today. Thank you, Professor Shavit.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.